Hey, and welcome back to part 4 of what now looks like it's going to be a 5-part tutorial on our Mario Shuffle board game. So in parts 1, 2, and 3 we got the game board set up, we got our player 1 moving around quite nicely, responding to the various random tiles that are underneath them on the screen. Now, today in part 2, we have a little bit more to clean up with player 1, but we're also going to be copying over a whole bunch of the code from player 1 and making some modifications so that we have an actual 2-player game going here. So we'll be working on that next. Really excited to get going, so let's get right to it. So now that we have player 1 more or less working properly, we can turn our attention to player 2. Now, you're not going to be surprised probably to hear that a lot of the code here is duplicated. So we're going to be doing a process of just moving big blocks of code over to player 2's character and then making a few minor changes to it. So to copy the code over, we're just going to grab big blocks of it one at a time. I'm going to grab this green flag chunk, for example. I'm going to drag it on top of player 2. And you'll know that you're pointed in the right spot when you see it give a little wiggle, just like that. And so if you let go at that point and then go over to player 2, you'll see that the block of code has in fact transferred over to the other sprite. Now we can go ahead and make changes. So this is the main code block here under the green flag. And most of this stuff is going to stay the same. The current space that we're standing in is actually our second player is starting at the end of the map rather than the beginning. So it is actually, the current space is 48 for this second character, not number 1. And the only other piece that has to be changed here is we're initializing the red team points. Red team is player 1. So we want to change this to blue team points. Blue team points for the second team. And everything else in this block stays more or less the same. So let's grab the second big block of code here in player 1, which is the when I start as a clone block, and we'll copy that over. All right, a few changes to make here. Let's just move this someplace where it's a little more visible. Firstly, all the new characters are being placed in the same X position. They're still starting on the left side of the screen here, but at the bottom, so the Y coordinate here has to change. Instead of 80, we're going to make this minus 142, and we're going to do that for the other coordinates here as well. So minus 142 for the second character and minus 142 for the third character as well. Okay, so the characters, their costumes obviously aren't going to be the same as well because we've got different costumes here. We've got different characters here. So the top character, number 1, is going to be Toad. So let's switch this initial costume to Toad Idle. And then the second guy is going to be Peach. So let's switch that to Peach Idle. And the third one is going to be Yoshi, so we'll go Yoshi Idle. There we go. So we've got all 3 of these changed. The starting costumes are also going to be different here. So the starting costume for Toad is going to be number 15. You can see the costume numbers are quite a bit different for these second characters. Instead of having just 4 animations, some of these guys have quite a few more. Princess Peach here, for example, has 7 different costumes on top of her idol. So, and you can see Yoshi has quite a few more as well. So the animation is going to be a little bit different here for player 2 characters. Okay, so the starting costume for Toad is 15. The starting costume for Peach is still going to be 1. And the starting costume for Yoshi, let's have a quick look there, is going to be number 9. And let's enter that. Oh, that is already at 9. Okay. And that's all we have to change in this block of code. One other minor problem here that becomes obvious when we test the game out. Our players are going to initialize here, but Princess Peach is just way too big. So we're going to change her size manually. That's just a minor discrepancy in the graphics here. We're just going to set her size to 50%. And that will get these guys initialized quite nicely. There we go. Now they look like they are part of the same unit here. Excellent. All right, we're going to go grab the next block of code here, which is the when I receive player one's turn. So I bet you can figure out the first thing we're going to do here. Let's drag this over to player two. And we'll change the event that triggers this off here to player two's turn, of course. There we go. So now when player two's turn is invoked at the end of player one, most of the rest of these variables are just copies of what's happening in player one here. Though we're going to set the turn here to 2 instead of 1. Excellent. Okay, so next we're going to grab this really big when this sprite clicked block and drag it over to player 2. And let's reposition it so that it's not in front of everything. All right, so a few minor changes here. First of all, we're not looking for turn 1 here. We're looking for turn 2. And scrolling down here, pretty well everything is good here. Except, so we're down at the spot here where it says if red team points equals 2. We're going to change that to say blue team points. Then we're going to broadcast not player 2's turn, but player 1's turn. So we're going to flip back to player 1 here. And down here at the end, we're also going to switch back to player 1's turn. And I think that's all the changes that have to be made in this particular piece of the code. I think there's not too much, just little bits here and there that we have to do. Okay, we're going to grab a bunch of these custom blocks next and drag them over. Okay, almost forgot the initial sounds that they're going to make when we click on them here. So these, of course, are customized for the player 1 characters. Let's change these noises around. There's equivalents to them for all of them. So we'll start off with Toad clicked on, which sounds like this. Hey! And then player number equals 2. The initial sound will be Peach is clicked on. Okay. And for the third character here, we're going to do Yoshi. Yoshi is clicked on. Yahoo! Here we go. That's cute. All right, and so that is it for when the sprite is clicked. All right, let's have a look at some of these custom blocks and what has to be changed here. We'll start with the little standstill block here. That one remains the same. Moving backwards here, the process is very similar, but when we reach the end of a row, we don't want to move down, we want to move up. So we're going to change that, where we're changing the y by 45 here, we're going to change that to minus 45. And moving down a little bit further here. Now this is the area where we deal with what happens if we move backwards back to our starting position. But our starting position here is in fact 48 rather than 1 because we're at the end of the board instead of the beginning. So we're going to change the current space. So the if statement here is going to say if current space is greater than 48 in all 3 of these cases here. So let's change that less than to a greater than 48. Current space is greater than 48. There we go. And then we're going to set the current space to 48 in every one of these cases, because that is our new starting position. And we want to fine tune these coordinates here as well. So again, we're going to change the y coordinate here from 80 to minus 142. And that'll reset these guys to start at the bottom left of the screen when they get when they have to move backwards. It's 142. Okay. Now, moving forward has some similar issues. Right here where we're changing our y by minus 45. We're moving in the opposite direction here again, so we're changing that to 45. And I believe that's the only change that has to be made there. Now moving on to our walk cycle here. This is, remember, where we change our walking animation to change the costumes as we're walking along here. The structure, so this is the original one for player 1. This is the new one that we've devised here for player 2. And you see it looks a little bit different. The structure isn't really all that different. The problem is that we have a different number of costumes for each guys. In player 1, every character has the same number of costumes, but in player 2, we've got quite a few more costumes for some of these characters. And so we cannot just use the one-size-fits-all animation approach. If we compare these, though, you can see a lot of this is pretty much the same as the original player 1 setup. The bottom here, the switch costume is the same. At the top, we're changing animation. But it's, instead of having one if statement here, we actually need 3 different if statements that reflect the number of costumes that each of these different characters is wearing. So for the first character, we're going to need 9 costumes. For the second one, the princess, we're going to need 8. And for Yoshi here, we're going to need 6 costumes. So we're going to have to make quite a few changes to this walk to get this working properly. Let's move down to happy noise. Again, we're going to have to customize these sounds here. So Mario lands on a good space for player 1 becomes Toad lands on a good space. For 2, it becomes Peach lands on a good space. And for player 3, it's Yoshi lands on a good space. And again, we'll do the same thing for the sad noise here. It is Toad lands on a bad space. Peach lands on a bad space. And Yoshi lands on a bad space. Okay, one last little detail I forgot about. In both the moving forward and moving backward, we're changing the current space around, right? But remember, in player 2, we're moving backwards. So when we're moving backwards, we're actually changing the current space by 1. So moving backwards will actually increase the number of spaces that we're moving all the way until we get to the end or the beginning, which is 48. And so the opposite applies with moving forward here. When we're moving forward, we're going to change our current space by -1 with every step forward we take. So we start on 48, and as we move forward, we go to 47, 46, etc. So that number is -1. Okay, so I think that's the major changes that have to be made between player 1 and player 2. And you'll see that that once we get this tested out here, that the game's actually running fairly well now. Let's roll our first dice. So we've rolled a 5 and a 3. Let's go ahead. It looks like it's safe for both the player 1 players to move here without any changes. And let's do Wario here.
Wario time!
All right, so our dice have reappeared and we're ready to roll again, and these should theoretically be the dice for player 2. Let's give it a try. A 1 and a 2. All right, let's let Princess Peach get the 1 for the big +4 bonus. She moves 1.
Excellent.
It says excellent, and then moves forward 4. Beautiful. All right, let's try Yoshi here to move forward 2.
Yahoo!
Beautiful, and then the dice pass back to Mario and friends again.
Okie dokie!
Let's just run it through one more round here.
Wario time!
And they all met up in the middle there. One more try for the player 2 characters. All right, who's going to move 6 here? Let's try Toad here. And we'll give him a punishment. Backwards 4. Beautiful. And Princess Peach will move the 1, and she'll have to go back 4 as well.
Okay.
Beautiful. Okay, so this is working really nicely now. Excellent. Okay, so while we're tweaking things for player 1 and player 2 here, there is a little interface element that I forgot. When we hover our mouse cursor over these characters, we're going to want them to just glow a little bit. Just give us a little bit of feedback to tell us that we're pointing at the right character when we're about to select them. So we're going to create something called a rollover effect, which just makes the character kind of pop. We're going to make it a little bit brighter, and we're going to move it to the front when we're moving our cursor over to it. So let's go. When I start as a clone, we'll go forever. We're starting in player 1 here, but we are going to duplicate this for player 2. Let's grab an if-else statement. I'm going to say if I'm touching the mouse pointer, we're going to go to the front, and we're going to set the brightness effect to 20, so just a little bit brighter. And then otherwise, when we move our cursor away from the character, then we're going to reset that brightness back to 0 again. All right, let's just drag that over to player 2 so that they both have access to this. And let's have a look at what that looks like now. So you can see now, instead of being hidden behind his friends, Mario comes right to the front when we select him, as do the other characters. Beautiful. So we have a much clearer idea here of who we're pointing at. Let's do the same thing for the player 2 characters. There we go. You can see how they glow a little bit and move to the front when we move our mouse cursor over them. So our players are moving around quite nicely now on both teams. They're paying attention to what kind of square they're standing on, moving backwards and forwards. There's one scenario we haven't dealt with here, which is what happens if we roll doubles. You'll remember that we've set up a special rule here that when we do roll doubles, then all 3 players must move during that particular round, or at least all the players that are still on the board that haven't finished the game yet. So we detect doubles right here. We just compare our first die roll and our second die roll. I'm inside the player 1 sprite, but there's one of these in the player 2 sprite as well. And if that happens, we broadcast doubles. So that broadcast is going to go to all our clones, and they're going to get instructions here to move forward. Now we've broken that into 2 different parts. The first part is going to be just controlling the flow of the game, and that part is going to be taken care of by the main sprite. And then the individual players are all going to move forward. So let's have a look at the code here. We're going to start off with when I receive doubles here. So we're going to do the part that just controls the flow of the game now. So only player number 4, the actual original sprite, is going to receive this message. We don't want all our clones running the same code here. And it has to be turn 1, which means that it's player 1's turn here as well. Otherwise, it's going to ignore this doubles message. Okay, so when that happens, we're going to play this familiar dun 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 sound from scratch, which tells us something ominous is going to happen. We're going to wait 1 second before stuff starts going crazy here, just to give us a sense of just to give people a chance to see that they've rolled doubles and to anticipate that on the screen before stuff starts moving. Now, we're going to basically hold this program in place here until all the members on the red team have moved. We've got this variable here called red team members moved, and we want that to end up being equal to the number of players that are available to move. So normally it would be 3, so we wait for all 3 players to move. But if we've already brought 1 player home, for example, we only need 2 of them to move before we can carry on here. So we're waiting until all the available players who are ready to play the game or who are ready to move their pieces forward have moved them forward, and then we can move on here. So we move on by playing this coin sound, which signifies to players that that the round has changed hands. Then we're going to broadcast that it's player 2's turn, and then we're going to broadcast this new turn message. And we haven't dealt with this yet. This will be helpful a little later on. Okay, so that's the main block of code here that controls the gameplay flow. Now we have to tell all 3 of our characters to actually start moving forward by the number that we've rolled on our doubles dice. So let's go ahead and do that. We can't really test this until everything's ready to go here, so you're going to have to use your imagination a little bit. All right, so we're doing another when I receive doubles. And the first thing we're going to do here is figure out how many players are left to play in the game. So we're setting a variable called a red team total to modify itself based on the number of points we scored. Every time we score a point, we're bringing a player home and they're no longer able to play the game anymore. Once Mario crosses the finish line, he's not going to move back and forth on the screen anymore. So our team will get 1 point. So let's say Mario has crossed the finish line. So now our red team total is going to be 3 minus 1, which is 2. So we're waiting for 2 players to finish playing before we can carry on. We're waiting for 2 players to move forward with the double before we can carry on to the next player's turn, basically. All right, so we're going to make sure that this set of commands is executed only by the clones. So we're going to say if player number is less than 4, meaning only the clones are involved, and turn equals 1, meaning it's player 1's turn, then we're going to set red team members moved to 0. So we're just going to initialize that variable at the start, and then we're going to start incrementing it upwards every time that someone makes a move in the game, basically. Okay, so we're going to set another variable called have I moved to 0. That's a local variable, so each of these guys is going to be setting that to 0, saying he hasn't moved yet. Then we're going to wait 2.9 seconds. That's the exact length of time that the dun 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 piece of music takes to finish playing. And then we're just going to move forward. So we're going to repeat by the number that we rolled on die 1. It doesn't matter, die 1 and die 2 are the same, but we're just picking die 1 here. And we're going to run this moving forward script the number of times that matches the number on our dice. Okay, so after we've moved forward, we need to check underneath us to see what blocks we're actually stepping on, whether we're going to be pushed backwards by red blocks or forwards by blue blocks. And all of that code is being copied over directly from our when this sprite clicked. You can see that there's an if-else statement in here that we worked on in our last episode, that it's right here. So right after the repeat die roll 2, we're doing an if-else statement, and basically this entire if-else statement is being transferred over into our when I receive doubles. So I'm going to grab this entire block here and put it inside the loop here. So now we're going to double check to make sure that we're not moving forwards or backwards. And then at the very end of that, we're going to broadcast end move sequence, and we haven't coded that yet, so I'll be getting to that in a little bit. And we're also going to change the number of red teams players who have moved by 1. So each time one of these players moves, he'll change that variable by 1. And that will let us know that all 3 of our players have moved. Okay, so we're ready to test out our doubles, but we're going to have to end up playing for quite a while until we accidentally hit doubles. So to save ourselves a bit of time, we're going to hack the game. Let's go over to when I receive player 1's turn. You can see down here this is a spot where we evaluate to see if there's doubles. So right before that moment, I'm just going to manually modify what die roll 1 and die roll 2 are to make sure that it actually is doubles, and that way we can artificially create a double. Okay, so we'll start the game and we'll see what kind of dice roll we're looking for here. So let's just start with a plain vanilla dice roll. Let's say we roll a 2 here. That's going to move all our characters forward 2 spaces. So I'm just going to set die roll 1 to 2 and set die roll 2 to 2. And then I'm going to actually roll the dice, and you're going to see that it's going to pick a random number, then it's going to override it with that number 2. And hopefully our players are going to move 2 spaces. Let's give that a try. 5, 4, and that gets changed to a 2. And all 3 of our characters move forward by 2. Beautiful. And when we try to move them again, you'll see that they are no longer able to move, which is perfect. This is working nicely. Okay, now let's try having them land on a special square. We're going to restart the game with a green flag. And I'm going to want them to go, well, Well, that's going to bring us back to the beginning of the game. Okay, here's a good one. So I'm going to want to roll a 3, which will bring us to a -2 square, which will make them move forward to here and then back to this blank square here. So let's change that dice roll to 3 for both dice, and then hit our space key. 4, 1 changes to 3, 3. So we'll go up to the 3 and then 2 backwards. Beautiful. Okay, that's working nicely. Let's do it one more time to advance forward. So let's find an interesting dice roll here. Okay, so let's roll a 3, which will move us ahead 5. So we've already got 3 here. Let's roll our dice. So we'll move 3 and then 5 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Beautiful. Okay, so our doubles are working quite nicely now. We can take that manual code out of here now, so we don't have to hack it anymore. All right, so now we have to get this going for our player 2 as well. We're just going to copy a bunch of this code over and make a few minor changes. Let's start with this little block of code. When I receive doubles, go ahead and drop that in there. Okay, so just a couple of things to modify here. This red team members moved variable has to change to blue team members moved. And the same with this wait until variable here. Let's change that to blue team members moved equals blue team total. There we go. And we're going to broadcast at the end player 1's turn, of course. Okay, that's good for that block of code. Let's go back to P1 and we'll grab the other longer block of doubles code and drag it over to P2 here. And then we'll go have a look at it. All right, so we're going to change red team total to blue team total. We'll change red team points to blue team points. Looking. And then at the end, we're going to change red team members moved to blue team members moved. Okay, I just tested this and had some problems and realized that there's a couple things I forgot. Now in both our doubles blocks for player 2, we're mentioning the turn here. This turn variable has to be 2 to signify that it's player 2's turn. That comes up in 2 different spots here. And then I had some trouble with transitioning back to player 1. I'm not sure if this is something that I modified in my code, but I'd like you to go and double check your version of the code for player 1. Under when I receive player 1's turn here, for some reason I didn't have the resetting of these variables, set die roll 1 to 0 and set die roll 2 to 0. If you just go back and confirm in your own file that that's not there, I might just have pulled it in my version, but just make sure that that's there in player 1. With that taken care of, we can go ahead and simulate player 2 getting doubles now. So I'm going to go back to my code for doubles here, for the dice roll here, sorry, and I'm going to manually add, here it is. So right up here, just as we did for player 1, I'm going to manually add a dice roll here. Let's see, we'll just add it whenever we think it's appropriate here. So let's go ahead and play through round 1 here. So I'm going to move player 1 and player 2 now.
I'm ready. Oh, yeah.
So Luigi jumped forward, and Mario here is going to go forward and then backwards to the start again.
Okie dokie. Ow.
All right, good. All right, so now it's time for player 2 to roll. Let's have her roll a 3, which will bring her onto the +4 square, and we can just double check that that's working properly now. So let's roll the dice. We roll double 3s, so all our players are going to move 3, and then they're going to move 4 more forward. Okay, beautiful, and our die roll is ready. Let's just bear with this and play player 1 again, just to make sure that that's working properly. Roll the dice. So now we've got a 4 and a 3, so we'll go
Okie dokie.
4.
Yahoo!
And we'll move Luigi here forward 3 to be in the same square as Mario.
I'm ready.
All right, so everything seems to be working quite nicely here. Excellent. Okay, now that we've got the double sorted out, we need to add another rule to the game, and this is the one that might frustrate some of you. Like in similar games like Sorry, for example, when our piece lands on top of an opposing piece, we're going to send them back to the beginning of the game again, which is very sad to happen to you, of course, but can feel quite fun when you're on the dealing end of it. All right, so we're going to check for that. We need to have the player who is actually being knocked out checking, which is so this is the one thing that's going to happen to the player whose turn it isn't when it's not their turn. So you'll remember that we're sending out this broadcast called and move sequence. It happens twice during the course of the code. The first time we move, we broadcast that message. And also, if we've been affected by another square, like this -4 here, for example, and we move backwards 4, at the end of that second movement phase, we'll again do a check. And what's happening in this and move sequence is we're checking to see if we're broadcasting it to the opposing player, and they're going to check to see if they are being stepped on by a player from the opposing team at that point. Now, you remember that every time we move, we're adding our current space to a list here called check space. So every move that happens during your opponent's turn is going to get added to this check space list. So now we can look at that list and have each of our players check to see if their current space number adds up and matches to the check space that's been placed on the list by our opposing player. So we're going to first of all start by grabbing a when I receive and move sequence. Now, like all messages, this is going to be received by every single one of the clones. We're going to need an if statement here and an and. So we're checking a couple of things here. First of all, we're checking to see if so we're in player 1 right now. We're checking to see if turn equals 2, meaning if it's player 2's turn and we're player 1. And then the last thing we're going to do here is check that check space list and see whether it contains the current space that we're on. Every single one of these clones has a current space local variable that tells it which of these spaces it's on. So if you happen to be on the same space that just got added to the check space list, then bad things are going to happen. First of all, we're going to take our current space variable and set it to 1, which is going to bring you back to, well, that won't bring you back to the beginning. We'll record that you were back in the beginning. And then we have to physically move you to the beginning. All right, so we're going to add a series of if statements here that are customized for each of the players. So player 1, Mario, we're going to put this inside that first if statement right down here. So if it's Mario, we're going to send it back to an x of -210, a y of 80. And then we're going to point him in the proper direction just in case he's spun around. And we're going to play a unique sound for Mario that shows him being very disappointed. And we have similar sound effects for all the other characters as well. So we're just going to carry on and modify those for each one. Okay, I have 2 more if statements to place in here. One for Luigi and one for Wario. We're going to put those right below the other if statements. So the player number changes here, of course. The x-coordinate changes as well. So the second x-coordinate's -195. And the one for Wario here is -225. You can see the sound effects are different as well. I'll just play Wario's sound here just to give you an example. Poor Wario. Okay, beautiful. Now we have to go and make this same change for player 2. So I'm going to grab this entire block of code, drag it over to player 2. And it's the same message, but of course we're waiting for player 1's turn for us to start getting knocked out. So we're going to change the turn to 1 here. The current space, the space we're getting knocked back to, isn't 1 because player 2 is ending down at the bottom left here at square number 48. So let's change that. Now the x-coordinates don't change here, and you might have noticed that from earlier in the game when we were positioning our players as well. The x-coordinates stay the same, but the y-coordinates are down at the bottom of the screen at -142. So let's go ahead and make that change across all 3 of those sprites. All right, and then the sound effects. So we start with Toad. Toad lands on a... Oh no, Toad is landed on is what we're looking for here. And then Peach is landed on. Let's hear what she sounds like. No! No! Very sad. And then, of course, Yoshi is landed on as well. Okay, let's play him as well. Okay, we want to give this a thorough shakeout here and test our game, but it's going to take a while for us to get into striking distance of each other. So let's just take advantage of the magic of fast forward here and play through a quick round of the game. Okay, so Princess Peach from player 2's side has reached striking distance of Mario here. She's rolled a 6, and that should take her right on top. And let's try that out and see if we connect here. So I'll click on the Princess Peach.
Okay.
There we go, and Mario gets sent right back to the beginning with a pitiful wail. Perfect. Okay, so this is coming along quite nicely. Okay, one more little rule that I want to add to the game, and that's the ability to swap dice. So right now, our first dice roll on the screen, for example, is 6, and the second one's 3. There are cases when I want to move 3 first and then 6. It's not super useful during the game because you can't strategically move the same player 3 and then move him 6, for example, like you can in backgammon. But there are going to be times when it's useful. Some people just like to roll the smaller number first before the bigger number. But more importantly, when you're down to just one player playing the game, he will only be able to use one of these dice rolls. So sometimes you'll want him to move the second number instead of the first one. And in order to do that, we're going to have to swap those dice rolls. So we're just going to take those numbers and change them into each other, which means an intermediary step where we have to save them. If I overwrite the value of dice roll 2 with dice roll 1, then my computer will forget what dice roll 2 is. So I need to create a third variable called dice stored in order to make this swap work. So we're going to activate this when we hit the letter Q on our keyboard. We're going to have an if statement here, and we're going to check for 2 things. First of all, we're checking if our character moving is equal to 0. So if someone's already started moving on the screen, then it'll be too late to swap the dice, of course. And we're also checking to see if our active die is equal to 1. We don't want to be able to swap it after we've already used up our first dice. So the only opportunity to do that will be right at the beginning here when our active die is equal to 1. All right, so all we're going to do is swap these values. We're going to take this dice stored variable, and we're going to store our first dice roll in there as a temporary location. We're going to do a wait 0 seconds here just to make sure that processes. If these things all happen simultaneously, then we might end up losing our value. Then I'm going to take what's in die roll 1 right now and transfer it over to die roll 2. Then I'm going to wait. Oh, sorry. I'm setting die roll 1 to match what's in die roll 2. Then I'm going to take die roll 2 and set it to match what's in that stored variable, which used to be die roll 1. Okay, fairly straightforward. That's not too complicated. Let's just have a look at it here inside the actual gameplay. So we'll roll our dice. We rolled a 5 and a 4. And then when I hit that Q key, it turns into a 4 and a 5. And you can go back and forth here until you've actually rolled. But then after that, so let's do the 4 first here.
I'm ready. Oh, yeah.
And that was a nice roll for Mario. And now we'll move, or sorry, that was Luigi. Now let's move Wario 5.
Wario time.
Not a good move for Wario. He's pretty frustrated. Okay, I believe there's just one piece of code left in player 1 and player 2, and then we just have to clean up a few interface elements and we're going to be done. So we're in the home stretch here. So we need the ability for players to leave the board when they get to the end, and that's the next part we're going to be coding here. We're down at the very bottom of the main code block in player 1, which is when the sprite is clicked. So down at the very bottom of it, not inside any of the existing loops, but in a separate if statement here, we're going to check and see if current space is greater than 47. So there are 48 squares, so if we get above 47, we will by definition have finished the game board, and that player will be taken out of play at that point. So how are we going to go about doing that? Well, first we're going to broadcast a message here called character has finished, and that will be taken up elsewhere. I don't believe that broadcast affects player 1 or player 2. It will cause other things to happen elsewhere in the game. We're going to play that happy noise. We already have a little custom block here that makes that happen. And it's not playing a noise right now because we haven't identified the player ID of the character, but that will make a happy noise. And then we're going to change some of our variables around. So the variable called character is moving. We're going to set it to 0. We're going to change the point for the red team, for the first team, by 1. And we're going to change the active die by 1 as well, which will activate the second dice, or send the dice to 3. Either way, it's going to move us on to the next spot in our dice here. All right. We changed our active dice by 1. If it ends up being greater than 2, meaning we've used up both our dice, then we're going to broadcast player 2's turn, and we're going to let player 2 act at that point. And then we're going to broadcast a new turn message. We've already dealt with that. And at the very end, we're going to delete this clone, which is going to just get rid of that character off the game board, so we can't mess with him anymore. At the very bottom of this, outside of the if statement, we're just going to do a standstill, which is going to reset our character's animation in case he doesn't die, or in case he's not done, which is going to be the case almost all the time here. Okay, so that is it for that. We'll test it in just a second, but let's copy this over to player 2 and just make a few minor changes here. So I'm just going to take the bottom part after the if statement, drag it over to player 2, and let's go look for it there. Here it is. And let's go down to the bottom of that massive block of code that starts when I've clicked, which I believe is when the sprite clicked. It's gigantic. Oh, there it is. So let's move this down to the bottom and attach it here. All right. So we don't want to say if current space is greater than 47 here. We want to say if it's less than 2. So we're going to say if it's less than 2, then we're still going to broadcast character is finished. We're still going to play our happy noise. All the rest of these variables are still going to be okay, but we're going to broadcast player 1's turn here instead of player 2. And that is actually all the changes we're going to make. Okay, I would like to test that ending scenario, but I don't want to play through an entire game. That'll be exhausting. And it's difficult to order sprites around. I can't just drag stuff and move it around because the game's going to move it to where it thinks it's going to be. So we're going to do a little bit of coding to get Mario here just right up to the edge of the end of the board here. We're going to do that by broadcasting a message here. So this is not going to be the finished game. This is just for testing purposes. I did a broadcast test ending, and when I receive that, we're going to go to the front layer, and I'm only going to act if I'm player number 1, who's Mario. I'm going to set my current space to 46, which is this square here before the end. I'm going to point in the direction left. And current space is a variable that tracks which square I'm on, but it doesn't actually put me on that square. So I've put myself on that square by saying go to the XY coordinates minus 90, minus 142. So you'll see when I click on this broadcast test ending, Mario jumps to the spot where I want him to be. And from here I can just play the game. So let's roll our dice. We rolled a 4 and a 5. So let's go ahead and click on Mario, and he should disappear off the game board and give a little hoot if everything worked properly.
Okie dokie. Ow! Yahoo!
And there we go. And so he's finished and he's left the game board. So the game over event is working beautifully. Excellent. We can go ahead and trash that. If you really want to, you can go ahead and do the same thing for player 2 to test him out. You'll have to change the XY coordinates around, but otherwise that should work quite nicely.